I'm sorry they call this crap, but that's probably not a nice thing to say. I should have said junk or something like that. But anyway, Nibley then goes on to explore the idea of an actual authentic Book of Abraham existing is very similar to that of Enoch. Through the centuries, there were rumors that an actual genuine Book of Enoch existed. And of course, Joseph Smith, in the 6th, 7th, and 8th chapters in the Book of Moses, discussed events in Enoch's life that's nowhere in the Bible, and yet these events are genuinely reflected in several different editions of the genuine books of Enoch that have been found. He says it's the same principle with the Book of Abraham. There really was an ancient Book of Abraham, and it was an autobiography. Well, this Apocalypse of Abraham, and he gives the history of it, page 9 and 10. He discusses the idea of the apocalyptic and the Apocalypse of Abraham existing around the time of Christ, and what influenced it, and what types of literatures perhaps that was involved with its production, and so on and so forth. Well, he says in the opening of the Book of Abraham, or in the opening of the Apocalypse of Abraham, this is on page 9 in his book. He says, since the opening sentence of the Apocalypse of Abraham says, I, Abraham, was searching as to who the mighty God in truth might be, this matches very closely to Joseph Smith's Book of Abraham, where it says, Abraham, desiring to possess greater knowledge, was seeking God earnestly. That's in Abraham 2:12. So Nibley thought, well, gee, let's compare these two texts and see how they compare. And that's what he does he does this on pages, the Apocalypse of Abraham and the Book of Abraham compared. And he does this in columns. Very, very instructive. And this is through page 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Wow. And now this was the Apocalypse of Abraham, you see. And then he turns around and he does the same thing with the Testament of Abraham. Now, along with the Apocalypse of Abraham, the companion piece is the Testament of Abraham. This is on page 20 of Nibley. And the oldest texts of the Testament are Greek. They were first edited by M.R. James in 1892. It's a 2nd century Jewish Christian writing composed in Egypt. Oh, now this is fascinating. The work concerning the life of Abraham is composed in Egypt. And this is the Egyptian connection with all of the Abrahamic literature, including Joseph Smith's Book of Abraham. So, there's something here to be said. Out of this apocalyptic study and the study of the Apocalypse of Abraham, there are the main features centering around the basic main theme of the holy man being taken to heaven. And then he turns around and teaches his family and his followers on his return, and he leaves his blessing with them. I mean, this is the idea of the testamentary literature. This is the testament of the 12 patriarchs in the pseudepigrapha, the testament of Reuben, testament of Dan, testament of Naphtali. And some of these testaments, incidentally, have been found in the recently discovered or recently released Dead Sea Scrolls also, so it's very significant there. And he says the scholars who explored the Testament of Abraham, and I also went and got this study. It's by George Nicholsburg. It's on aspects of the Testament of Abraham. Very excellent study. They concluded that the Egyptian origin is spelled out in considerable detail. Very interesting. And there's an aggregate of parallels that Schmidt found. And he says the Testament of Abraham used the Egyptian judgment scene as its model. The picture, that is, as well as the text, this is a drawing from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, was the inspiration for the Testament of Abraham. So now we have other Jewish Essene works. The scholars conclude it could be of Essene origin now, this Apocalypse of Abraham, discussing aspects of the Book of Abraham, or of the life of Abraham. This was based on an Egyptian model, and in fact was taken from the Book of the Dead. Now, this is fascinating because That's the argument against Joseph Smith's Book of Abraham. It can't possibly be about the patriarch, the Hebrew patriarch, because it's just Egyptian Book of the Dead materials. And yet, the basis of the ancient Abrahamic literature is based on this Egyptian Book of the Dead. So this is Nibley. This is Nibley just killing this criticism here, and he shows page after page. I'm not going to get into all of the elaborate parallels and details. I'll let you read these sumptuous goodies for yourselves. They are outstanding. Going through page, and then he shows other comparisons between the Testament of Abraham and the Apocalypse of Abraham to show how these two have very many same themes of the heavenly ascent, and puts it together with our Book of Abraham. Page 24-25 does that. Then he describes the idea of the testament applied to an ancient patriarch, prophet, or apostle. And this is interchangeable with the ascension or the assumption of the patriarch to heaven, which is the theme. This is one of the main themes of the literatures, including our Book of Abraham. And he goes through 26, 27, 28, 29. And he's talking about the sacrifice of Abraham and the meddling role of Satan in the story, and the sacrifice of Abraham in the Book of Abraham as well as of Isaac. It's just so fascinating because he's given an instructional tour of the universe and he's shown this in a picture. I've shared this in my podcasts, in my series on the facsimile 2 figure 7. And then he compares it with Moses 1, 9, and 10. Moses was himself left to himself, and he fell on the earth after his great vision. And then he said that's the famous one where, now I know that man is nothing. That's what Moses concludes after seeing this vast apocalypse, or this vast vision of the cosmos. And then Nibley describes the comparisons of the hypocephalus, this is on page 31, 32, 33, 34, with Homer's Iliad and the shield of Achilles, with the round picture that Abraham saw in his cosmic tour in the Apocalypse of Abraham. So in the Apocalypse, he has an ascent. He sees the universe drawn in a circle. And this corresponds perfectly with the hypocephalus in the facsimiles in the Book of Abraham. And it also has vast connections with the ancient Greek shield of Achilles idea. And this was some of the non-LDS scholars who put this together. So it's really remarkable how these parallels crop up in the exact same type of literature involving the same person, Abraham, and how the Book of Abraham fits, and how absolutely all of this material is based upon the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. That argument by the critics is vanished. It's gone. They won't admit that, but who cares? They don't admit to a lot of defeats that they've been handed, and that's okay. What we have to do is broaden our understanding and our own ideas and realize what the criticisms are in order for us to see how neatly they are removed with archaeological and historical research. That is the essence of what Hugh Nibley was all about throughout his lifetime of scholarship. So that's basically a nutshell of Chapter 1. I'm going to let you read the details and the goodies. This is really quite interesting. This takes us up to Chapter 2, which is starting on page 41. And here's where it starts getting a little bit thick, and so I'm going to take a little bit more time and detail in discussing Joseph Smith and the sources, because here's where Nibley refers a lot to his own writings, and it's necessary because he was the only one that was putting it together. So I'll get on that in my next podcast in this series. So thank you for joining me in this Backyard Professor podcast series. That's the essential review of Hugh Nibley's preface in his Chapter 1. I'll get on to Chapter 2, which is a relatively short chapter, in the next podcast. Remember, have a great life.